All right. Welcome back, everybody, and welcome to another future-focused weekly update where hopefully, if I'm doing my job well, I'm keeping you at the intersection, ahead of the intersection of business technology and the human experience. So all that to be said, thank you for everybody who watches, listens, follows, sends me the messages, reads my Substack, all that stuff. I always appreciate your engagement, and it would mean a lot to me if you liked, subscribe, tell somebody who would benefit, all that good stuff. Just helps, I don't know, helps other people find it, helps give me the encouragement I need sometimes on the days where I'm like, oh, do I have time to do this right now? But that said, I really do enjoy this. And I'm back to my usual rundown of some of the biggest things top of mind for me, just to help share some perspective, hopefully give some clarity on what it is. And so with that, we'll see how far I get. I've got a longer list than usual, so I'll be mindful of time. But the first one I wanted to talk about. So let's talk about the TikTok ban, because that has been something I've been watching and haven't really commented on for quite a while, just actually at all, I don't think, to date, because I really wanted to understand what was going on here. I didn't want to fuel the fire of inflammatory, alarmist type stuff and just really understand, hey, is this even something we should be worried about? Or is this something that's really even going to happen? Because I've seen these things come and go where everybody gets all excited and then nothing ever comes of it. And it definitely, legitimately, at least based on my latest updates, looks like, barring some sort of government intervention and reversal of the plans, TikTok's even changed what they're planning on doing. Before it was just like, well, it won't be available in the App Store. There will be redirect to tell you that there's technically a government ban on this, whatever. And TikTok's kind of said, fine, you want to shut down operations? We're shutting down operations. And as of Sunday, unless you change your mind, we're just going to go dark. And we're just going to give everybody the option. Hey, do you want to download your data? And you better, or if you want it, get it. Because after this, it's gone. And watching this whole thing unfold has been interesting. And I think one of my biggest frustrations is that what I often see presented in the headlines, I just don't feel is an accurate representation of the complexity of what's really going on. And I think that's from both sides. So, anybody who's watched or listened to me for long knows that if you're looking for me to take a hard stance on one side, they do pop up every once in a while, but it's rare. And even when I do, there's usually but I can at least see where the other side's coming from. This one to me is messy. And, I look at what originally some of the concerns were, and it already raised my eyebrows a little bit when, immediately he's like, we're going to ban TikTok out of fear of China, which to me is just already wrought with, can you go deeper than that? Because we consider them as a country, an adversary, but we also really don't, because we also do all this business with them. So already you're kind of propping China up as an entity that isn't even really an accurate representation of how we treat them, because we're very diplomatic and do a lot of work. So already it was wrought with what's really going on here. And I understand some of the legitimate concerns that people are raising about TikTok. I understand them. It can seem concerning for what may be seen as an adversarial country or empire having loads of data on the American people. I get that. And so I think that's where, it can make sense to say, so let's understand that. But as I was watching this unfold, and one, there were a lot of questions that I think should have been being asked that weren't asked. And then a lot of the questions that were asked, like, aha, we got you, they were given really reasonable answers for things. And there's a lot of inconsistency with it. And I struggle with this because I go, so we're going to ban TikTok and to be clear, I'm not even on TikTok. I know my wife likes TikTok. I know lots of people love TikTok. I see value in TikTok. More people search things on TikTok. It's great for getting information around, but it also comes with risk, like any technology. So I understand the arguments on both sides. I see the people who are going, TikTok being banned is going to destroy my livelihood. And I'm like, well, I understand that there are people that's going to happen to. I think that's part of the name of the game of whenever you put all of your eggs in one basket that isn't really even your basket, that's a risk you're always running. On the flip side, I see people who are like, TikTok's evil and they're, brain rotting everybody on the planet and wasting all our time, and it's owned by China and they're going to steal our data and use it to take over the world. It's like, well, I mean, I understand wanting to exercise data protection. I understand wanting to guard the American population. I understand, this, but I also don't think it's as big of a risk as we're seeing. And the greatest irony, if you haven't been following this trend, that to me just shows why you don't go about this the right way and why banning or compliance never works. So if you've watched this, my wife has been sending me countless videos of these things. So there's this app, I don't remember the name of it, but it's an actual Chinese app. It's all in Mandarin. It's run and governed by the Chinese government. And everybody has jumped off TikTok and jumped over to this new app where they don't even understand the language. They don't understand the culture. It actually is moderated and overseen by the Chinese government. So literally all the data that people are putting in here is, whatever. And so it's like, so you were trying to protect the American people and all you did was actually push them into potentially an even more vulnerable position. And I think that's just what happens when we try and make these sweeping type decisions where we go, I don't like this. Because really at the end of the day, it's a combination of I don't like this or I'm afraid of this. And I think the other part that is very much behind this, because you can see this even in the inconsistency, is there's a lot of money changing hands and influencing this decision, because we certainly are not applying the kinds of risk mitigation factors. We're not banning companies who are harvesting massive amounts of data on the American population. We're not doing that universally. We're certainly not doing it with US-based companies, let alone any companies. But for some reason, we've got our sights set on TikTok and we want them out. And I think there are a lot of players. I was reading an article the other day about who are the big social media platforms, who are the big tech companies that are going to benefit greatly if TikTok in the US no longer exists. And I don't know. I'm actually really curious. If you listen to this, I'm always fascinated talking with people about this because I have so many mixed feelings about it and I don't have a big stake in it. I'm not on TikTok. I really don't care about TikTok. It's not something that I've really ever valued or invested in or actually even ever signed up for. So for me, it's like, okay, the thing that everybody loves is going to be taken away. It doesn't affect me personally, but I do think it can, if we move forward with this, set a concerning precedent that certain things, if we just don't like them, if certain people decide they don't like them, even if their logic doesn't make any sense and everyone's going, you have a double standard here. Like, what is going on? That really doesn't matter. And in some ways, I actually think that is what people, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that's actually what people are having more of a visceral reaction to than the idea of TikTok going away. And I saw a video clip of some of the justices, asking the lawyers or something like that. And, they said, well, what's the big deal? Like, can't people just, if people can't be on TikTok, can't they just go to something else? And first of all, I think that's a stupid thing to say. I understand where it comes from, because if you don't understand TikTok, and honestly, even me, my initial reaction was, what's the big deal? But then if I think about it and something that I get a lot of value out of, or I really enjoy, and I think this justice used an example of like, I may love my old shirt, but my old shirt has holes and whatever. And so my wife tells me to get a new shirt, and I might not want to, but when I get a new shirt, it's fine. And I don't really think about my old shirt once it's gone. And I get that can be really offensive, but there is some truth in that ultimately, is the world going to stop if on Sunday they turn off TikTok? No. So if you're in the camp of absolute panic and you think this is the end of the world, that if we lose TikTok, it'll be okay. People will move on to other things. They'll change directions. I certainly don't think it's going to go the way some of these big tech players go. People aren't going to fly back to Meta in droves because they lost TikTok. We're already seeing people didn't do that. They literally went to an app run by the Chinese government in Mandarin that they don't even understand. And they're choosing to do that. And Duolingo sales are like through the roof because people want to learn Mandarin. People would rather do that than go back to Meta. And this is why sometimes I look at the decision-making and the logic behind this. But my point in saying this was, if you're somebody who's freaking out about the loss of TikTok, hang in there. It'll be okay. I've been spending more time on Substack, and I'm seeing a lot of people coming over from TikTok, and it's creating a new sense of community, and that community, it'll be uncomfortable for a bit and we'll move on. But I also don't want to dismiss that this kind of stuff isn't fun, and going through change, and especially when you know that it's not for, at least not completely, reasonable or logical reasons. And I do think it sets a dangerous precedent. And I do understand where people are going, so what? If the US government just decides it doesn't like something, it can use some arbitrary thing like, well, it's a foreign nation, or because really it's not that hard to imagine that you go from this to, well, that's run by a company who we've deemed as a terrorist, and so we're just going to ban it because of that. And it's like, I know you could sit and go down the rabbit hole, and I don't like doing that. But I do understand where people have concerns, and I think that's what people are reacting to. So if you're freaking out, hang in there, wait and see. That's the other thing, and why I waited to talk about this is it may not even be a thing. It may have been all a big hoopla, and then the US government backs down because they see everybody over on this government-run app, and they go, you know what, never mind. We reverse our decision. I don't know. Maybe they won't, and we'll all have to adapt, and we'll make some mistakes along the way. But I think for leaders, there's some real lessons here. Leaders, whether you're leading a company, whether you're leading as a parent, whether you're leading as another thing, is this kind of stuff, this kind of approach causes far more damage, and you will never achieve the outcome that you're actually trying to achieve. Let's just hypothetically say Zuckerberg and his lobbyists were behind a lot of this. Is Meta going to grow as a result of it? Maybe a little bit, probably not what they're anticipating, probably not worth the money they spent, if they did, on lobbying to get rid of all this stuff. So did they accomplish that? No. If it really was about protecting people's data and protecting the American population, did we achieve that goal? No. If anything, we made it worse. Everybody's jumping ship over to Lord knows what apps, and doing who knows what on these different things as a result. So did banning it work? No. It's frustrating to watch. And so I understand and empathize with the people who are rightfully upset. And I hope leaders pay attention to the response with this, because there's a lot of things, some that didn't even make my list this week, where if you watch human history, like, you can suppress, and I think we saw this with Syria, we saw this with Syria. You can suppress people, you can hold them down, you can kind of say you're doing this while really you're doing this, and you can manipulate and control things for so long. But eventually, the cracks in the foundation just blow out, and everything comes falling down, and it ends up being a much bigger mess than it needed to be. And if anything, this TikTok thing, I think, is going to create far more problems than it ever solves. So I will probably do an update next week, because I am really curious to see if they actually go through with it and see what the repercussions are. But I think the one thing I would advise to people is, don't just make hasty judgments or reactions on this. I get it's frustrating, especially if you're a big TikTok user, or if you're somebody who's built a living off of TikTok. I get that. and rightfully so. The peace of mind I would give you is if you made it this far, if you figured out how to use TikTok and be successful with that, you'll figure it out. If you're somebody who really loved TikTok and what it had to offer, well, clearly so did a large percentage of the US population. So something will fill that void. I would just say be careful that you don't run out to something just because I do see some of this stuff where people are now engaging in this, Chinese governed app. And I'm like, be careful. I mean, at least everything I saw from the TikTok lawyers, I went, based on what I know about technology, they seem to be operating at least on par with every other technology provider I know. I mean, sure, you can assume they have nefarious intentions behind everything, but you can do that about everybody. And then what? Then we don't do anything. So we'll see what happens. It's been wild to watch. And if nothing else, it's been entertaining to watch TikTok videos my wife has sent me of people experiencing Chinese culture. So let's take it for what we're learning through the exercise, which is people are getting exposed to Chinese culture. They're realizing, hey, wow, these aren't these enemies of the state across the other side of the world who are all set on destroying Americans. It's like, no, these are human beings and they're fun and they've got a cool culture that's very different than ours. And we can learn and experience from each other. And I'm hoping, if nothing else, this encourages that. So we'll see. Okay. This other one, I'll take a break from social media. I'll come back to it here in a minute. But this other one, I saw somebody post about this, and it was somebody I knew, and we ended up engaging in a conversation on it. So here's what happened. There was a gentleman who built an AI bot on his own, which sounds super complicated, but if you've played around with this, it's not all that complicated anymore. He built an AI bot, taught it and trained it how to apply for jobs, and like the full-blown thing, not just fill out the application, but tailor the resume to the job description, do all this stuff, fill out the ATS application, send it through, all this stuff. And just reminds me of something you see in a movie. He goes to sleep. He wakes up in the morning. This thing has applied to 1,000 jobs overnight, and he's got 50 interviews the next day, or people reaching out trying to schedule interviews with him. And he's kind of in this conundrum of like, well, oh my gosh, like now what do I do here? I've been trying forever, and now I did this. And I've seen reactions to this all over the map. And as always, I spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I've got some mixed feelings on it. I've seen the people who are like, this is cheating. This is terrible. This is really bad. He cheated the system. He didn't even apply to it. And in some ways, I hear where they're coming from, but I raise my eyebrows a little bit and be like, come on. You really think filling out an ATS and swapping out some words in your resume before you apply, you really think that's a distinctly human, worthwhile activity, that it's cheating if you use AI to do it? Why? Just because you don't know how to do it, so they have an advantage in your mind and they're cheating? But I get where they're coming from, because you hear this, and this is the part that I had a reaction to, is I'm like, 1,000 jobs in a day. If you think about the people who figure that out and the just incredible disadvantage or advantage they have over people who haven't figured out how to build an AI chatbot that can apply to 1,000, that divide between the haves and the have-nots is so exponentially wide. I mean, somebody who literally is physically trying to apply to 1,000 jobs, that would take weeks, maybe months to go through that, to find the job, to, look through, whatever. So I can get where people are like, this isn't fair. Like, what am I supposed to do? And while I think the reaction to, well, they have an advantage that I don't, that's not fair, that I think is like, well, come on, you could go learn how to do this and you could do the same thing. But where I get nervous is two areas. First of all, one, this volume speaks to how broken the hiring process is in companies. I mean, while you might say, wow, 50 interviews the next day, I think about it, I'm like, yeah, you had to apply to 1,000 jobs to get there. And you might go, well, but that's just the next morning. Imagine how many more he's getting. Okay, still the conversion rate on that is extremely small. And this is, in my opinion, doing the best of the best, all the best practices you're supposed to do. Find a job that's relevant, tailor your resume, personalize everything to just that job, go through so it's doing everything that the average person just doesn't even have time to do. And even after that, you're getting a 50 and 1,000 hit rate on that. Never mind the fact that just because you get called by 50, the funnel goes, narrows, and it's going to go even further down because of those 50, the AI made a mistake in there. I guarantee he got applied to a number of jobs he is not qualified for, has no clue what he's doing. And the recruiter is going to talk to him and go, why are we talking to you? So it shows how broken the system is. But what concerns me more is that rather than people saying, this system is messed up, we need to fix this, a human being should not have to apply to 1,000 jobs and follow all of the best practices only to get interviewed by 50. That's out of balance. We need to fix that problem. My concern is, instead of doing that, we're going to get the people who go, well, we could do that, but that's a lot more work. So you're going to get the employees or the job seekers who go, well, I'm just going to go learn how to build a bot. And applying to 1,000 jobs overnight is going to become the standard. That's going to become the expectation, furthering this divide between the have-nots and the haves, where if you don't apply to 1,000 jobs, and then as the next round of AI comes out, you got to apply to 2,000 jobs overnight and you won't get 50 calls, you'll get 5. And where does it end? It's just going to continue to balloon to the point where it's just like inflation. You see this with inflation, where these countries, they just inflate things to the point where a gallon of milk costs $1 million. You're like, whoa, how do you afford that? And you're like, well, $1 million, actually, it's really just like 50 cents because it doesn't actually mean anything. And you go, what are we doing here? So one, I'm concerned that employees are going to do that. And whether it's the employees that start it or the companies that are just making the problem, but employees are just reacting to the problem. With all that's going to happen, and this is, I'm not saying don't go do this, because if you've been desperate for a job and you haven't gotten called and you are on the verge, maybe the right solution for you is to quickly learn how to spin one up, or to get a subscription to one because somebody somewhere has capitalized on this. And now for $30 a month, you can buy one of these things. But the point is, maybe in your situation, you need to do this. I just want to encourage us not to react to this kind of stuff and start to go, this is what we have to do. Because one, it's going to add a ton of anxiety to this. But two, we're just going to fuel the machine. And what's going to happen is companies are going to go, my gosh, now we're getting 150,000 applications for every single job. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to stand up some AI that's going to counterbalance all this stuff, and the scales are going to go down. And then that means you're going to have to apply to 10,000 jobs to get 5 calls. And then they're going to up their AI because people are going to get 1 million applications for every job. And it's going to climb to this point of ridiculousness. And I really, truly hope we can get to the point where we just reset this. And so to the people who may be looking for jobs or struggling, I get it. My job was eliminated last year. I'm taking a different path. And maybe that's what you need to do. Maybe you need to go, what, screw this whole job application thing. I'm not going to go that route. I'm going to do something different. Or maybe you need to go back to a more analog version of things, which, if you listen to my predictions things last week, I think this boom of tech and the ridiculous pace it's got us on, I think we're going to see a lot of things start to go analog. And that may be your competitive advantage. Maybe you go, I'm not buying this crap. I'm not going to apply to 1,000 jobs that 970 of them I have no interest in to get called by 50 jobs I don't want anyway. Really, now you're just participating in the stress and anxiety associated with that. Maybe what you decide to do is go analog and slow down, reach out to people at companies you actually are interested in working at, spending time getting to know hiring managers, doing those other things that Yeah, it might feel like more work, might take a little bit more time, but it's going to net a better outcome in the end instead of just fueling the madness of AI applications. So we'll see what happens. But like I said, I guarantee we're going to see a swath of AI application bots, your job hunting coach, your job finding agent type thing and they probably already exist. I just didn't want to waste time looking them up because then I just rant about that. Okay. So let's talk about some Meta here. We talked about them a little bit based on some of what I think is heavily influencing some of this TikTok stuff, but Meta is all over the news right now for a number of things. So one, we've got this whole community notes thing going on that people are super upset about, and they're adopting the X thing. They're not going to use fact checkers because I understand potentially why. I think there can be some value coming from this. I also understand the feelings of people who are having a visceral reaction to this. It does raise the whole thing of like, what universal standard are we using to determine where quality comes into play? And when we just allow the masses to kind of decide based on this, and is it really objective? And I don't know enough details about the process they're following for community notes. I think there can be value in it if executed properly. So on this topic, once again, it's not here yet. So I don't have a whole lot to weigh in on. And I also haven't really seen how it'll be implemented. I've seen it done on X, and there are things I don't like about it. But there are also things that I think, hey, you know what? It's still here. But here's kind of what the community says. Why don't you take a look at this? And it's not just some random fact checker sitting in a cubicle at X headquarters. It's the community of users who are saying, hey, we know this is here, but are you also aware of these other things? And it gives people the freedom of choice, which is why I'm a little confused by some of the backlash and the anger around it. It feels a little bit like one of those, you want transparency, you want the opportunity to have more autonomy to make your own choice, and then that's given to you, and we're mad about that because we're concerned it's going to, but I also get it, because then the majority is the one making decisions about things, which always never goes well for the minority. And so I understand when you've been the underserved, the exploited, and suddenly you're like, oh, great. So now the majority, who has historically dogpiled on me, is going to get to community note anything they don't like. I'm stuck again. So I empathize with that. And honestly, until I see it start to play out, I'm not really sure where I sit, because to me, it's going to be an execution less than just, do I hate community notes? Do I think they're a bad idea? Well, I think it's going to be more in the execution of it, but I'm also keenly aware of the risks. And I think while fact checkers, and this goes back to like the job elimination thing, might fact checker disappear? Maybe, but is community note moderator going to become a thing? And I think that's where sometimes people freak out about stuff. And it's like, this is just going to shift, right? There's going to be, oh, we don't fact check anymore. We do community notes, but there are community note moderators that are watching this. And so if you think community notes solves the problem you thought we had, it's not going to. And if you're afraid that community notes is now going to mean the majority can just dogpile on the minority, I think Meta's been around the block enough to be able to at least watch out for that. So again, curious to see how it plays out in execution. The other thing Meta's in the notes for, or in the news, not the notes, in the news for, is the rise and fall of the AI users. If you weren't following this thing, at the end of the year last year, Zuckerberg was all in on, we are going to have AI users. They're going to look and feel like real people, and we're going to flood the market with it. And it, again, just felt like some of this madness where it was like, do you really think this is going to go well? Do you really think people are going to, this is going to foster trust and whatever? And it blew up. I mean, the whole thing imploded. People had just a visceral reaction to, these things were fake, they were biased, it was just gross stereotypes, it was not inclusive whatsoever. And so they're pulling back on it. But again, it's one of these, what problem were you trying to solve with this, Zuckerberg? Like, what were you hoping to do? And I get, you could say drive greater engagement. Really though, like how, in what way, what were you really trying to achieve here? Because is there a world where I could see AI users on Meta being a really good thing? Sure. If it's specifically for a certain purpose and target and people know what that is and this is how it's going to fit and how it's all going to come together, yeah, I can see a world where having some well thought through things could be valuable. On the flip side, the way it was done in execution was just a complete flop and it's already been rejected. Now, do I think this is going to be something that is not going to, it's going to be like a Hydra? You cut off the head, it's going to come back with two. So I'll be curious to see what happens. But again, until I see where it goes, I actually had plans to talk at length why I thought this was a really bad idea and was going to implode. But in the true spirit of change where we're at right now, it imploded before I even had time to comment on the topic. So you got that one, Meta's in the news. Then you also got Meta making the news for Zuckerberg coming out talking about he's going big on AI coding. And he's already talking about the impending layoffs that are coming as a result of this. And it very much has the same feel to me of this AI users thing, where it's like, did you not learn your lesson on this or from other things that you've done where this isn't going to end well? And I've worked very closely with some software engineers. I've worked closely with a number of different companies that are doing work in agental AI. These AIs are not going to be able to replace even the mid-level software engineer. And I think what it shows here with this is, for all Zuckerberg's brilliance, like him or hate him, smart dude, had a vision, took it somewhere. I feel like the longer he's been up in the stratosphere, the more we've started to see he's disconnected from the reality of people and how things really work. And I think this latest reflection of we're going to just replace all our coding, most of our coding, with AI agents, and we're not going to need people, so we're going to plan on laying them off. It's like, Mark, I think you've been up here too long and you've forgotten how the work gets done. And I think you've forgotten that most of what a software engineer is doing isn't just the actual tippy-typy put code into things. Like, that's not really what their job is. But I think it's starting a concerning trend that we'll see what happens. But I fully anticipate people are going to start jumping on this bandwagon, which they already are. If you listened to my predictions thing last week or read my Substack this week, I said this year is going to be the year we are really going to start to feel the hit of AI job displacement. And whether that's changing jobs for the companies that do it wisely or eliminating jobs for the companies who I think are going reckless, it's going to be a year of major job displacement. The question that I'm kind of waiting to see on what happens, and I said, I made those predictions so that I could tie into them throughout the year. I think this is a big example of where we're going to start to see this. The question for me is going to be, will this implode as quickly as Meta's AI user initiative did? Is it going to be something where it's like, we're going to do this and it's going to go so poorly, so quickly that the whole thing's going to collapse in on itself? Or is it going to take a little longer? And my prediction is it's going to be a relatively quick rise and fall. But I think Meta's made it clear where they're putting their chips. And I think they're on what I would say is the path of foolishness versus the path of wisdom, at least from what I can see in the decisions and the direction that they're going. So more to come on that. I'll be really watching closely the job displacement. I think if anything, just as a continued encouragement for people, one, if you still are not convinced job displacement is coming for you, like I said, whether that's elimination or transformation, I don't know. I don't work where you work. I don't know the mindset of your company, but it is going to come for you. So you want to be prepared for this, because whether it means being able to take your skills and translate and transfer them to somewhere else, or to build a case internally to show, hey, I'm more than just an AI agent. I do so much more. I think now is the time to do it and to make sure you're staying ahead of it. Okay. NVIDIA. This one I thought was really interesting. If you did not see this, they came out with a $3,000 AI supercomputer. The thing fits in the palm of your hand. It is powerful enough to run independently, I think it's 200 billion parameter LLM. Now, to give you an idea of where that's at, I think, don't quote me on it. So please, commenters, don't fact check. Christopher, that's not the right number. I think Anthropic's like 350 billion. OpenAI's is 200 billion. They're all in that range. So, I mean, essentially, like I said, I don't want to argue specifics, but my point in saying that is some of our current frontier models can run completely independently on this little monster of a machine for $3,000, which goes back to what I said in my predictions episode, that I don't think we're going to hit this AI ceiling. To me, this one's going to create a ceiling, but what it's going to do is it's going to democratize that ceiling to the masses so that literally independent developers, hobbyists, all these people can now actually have their own independent version of one of these open source models running in their house and do whatever they want with it, which, boy, I've got a lot of mixed feelings about this. But it very much feels like the day where, if you remember back in the late 90s, mid 90s, when desktop computers were first becoming a thing and you could go on gateway.com and custom build your desktop. And it was about $3,000 for a decent computer. And at the time, that was a lot of money to spend on this. And so $3,000 now is less than that, but still not cheap for somebody who's just going to run out and buy a computer, especially when you can buy a laptop for a few $100. But I mean, this really is taking all the power of some of these Omni models and bringing them right into your household, where you have really unlimited ability to do what you want with them and to toy and play and see what happens. And I definitely have some concerns about democratizing this kind of power before we've really even figured out how to manage and govern and oversee and do all this. Now, do I think some incredible things are going to come out of it? For sure. If that kid can build a fusion reactor for $2,000 in an Anthropic subscription, I mean, I can only imagine what somebody's going to be able to do when they have their own version of it. Now, you might say, well, how is this really all that different? Can't you just have a subscription and do what you want? Yes, but what having your own open source version of it running locally on your drive is, it means you can actually manipulate and twist and bend and unbreak, unbound certain things that you wouldn't be able to on these governed, moderated models, because they go, hey, it's not us, it's you. You're doing it yourself. It's kind of like giving somebody a DIY fusion toolkit that you can buy and take home and go, hey, do what you want with it. Like, I don't know, see where it goes. And so I think what I do think this might do is this may radically accelerate the need to govern, what is actually available to the public, because there's a lot of stuff that's open source and a lot of these big models are open source. And I think this may push more governance around, well, whoa, like who's, does anybody remember this? I remember back when I was a kid, one of the big things was, everybody wanted to get their hands on the Anarchist Cookbook. It was this thing you could get on the internet, and the dark web didn't exist then, but you could get it, but it was kind of like tracked. It was moderated. People knew if you had it and they were watching, and you had to be careful because you didn't want to download it, because if you did, you might get flagged and caught and all this stuff. And I feel like we're going to start moving into some of that territory where it's like, yeah, you can go buy a $3,000 AI supercomputer and you can go ahead and download this, but there's going to be some strings attached, and we're going to start to be watching and monitoring what you're doing with this to make sure you're not going crazy. But at the same time, I look at some of these stories of people who are getting arrested with entire arsenals of stuff in their house. And it's like, I mean, you got to go buy that at a physical store. Imagine what you can do when you can just get a computer sitting at home and download it off the internet. So very cool in terms of what its capability and its potential is. Honestly, extremely concerning. So I guess, to the everyday person, like I said, hold on, because the change is going to keep coming. It's not slowing down, and things like this are only going to make it come faster and harder, and even more significant. But I think at the same time, you don't have to participate in that. And I think that's the one thing. Going back to just like that job application thing. Maybe you hear NVIDIA $3,000 supercomputer and you go, you know what? I'm actually really going to lean into this and try and be on the front end of that curve. Or you might say, you know what? I'm going to create my own curve and be on the front end of that curve. And it doesn't involve having my own custom built AI Omni model sitting in my desk that I can manipulate and twist and bend to do my bidding. I don't know. I think that's a journey every single person has to go on and say, so how am I going to respond to this? All right. Last but not least is, this one's maybe a few weeks old, but I wanted to touch on it because Apple is going, Tim Cook made a big announcement that Apple is going all in on, and the way it was worded, it's like, Apple's committed to saving your life. And so I was like, what does that mean? Because last I checked, an iPhone isn't, I guess, I don't know. It depends on how you define it. But they are really going to be going into healthcare. And they're really going to be taking time to focus on using the latest in tech to advance health outcomes, to improve healthcare, to make things more sustainable, to make healthcare more accessible, more affordable, and to use technology to do that. And if you're an Apple Watch user, you already know this, because you know the advancements they've made and some of the apps and the integrations they've built into the Apple Watches to make it more easy to manage and moderate and keep track of your health and know where you are and how you're doing and if there's changes you should be making. So I think it's a interesting move. I'm curious to see where Apple goes with it, and where, whether they'll look to integrate further into their existing devices, or whether they will start to spin into the health device space. I know the Apple Watch, I think technically can be or is registered as a health device. So will they come out with new things? Will they go in deeper in that? It's still too early, but what was clear from this announcement is Apple is committed to healthcare, which, here's my take on that. I'm actually encouraged by that, because one of the things that I appreciate about Apple, you can love or hate Apple, but one of the things that I appreciate about Apple is they have a track record, not perfect track record, but a pretty solid track record of being thoughtful and intentional and purposeful about the decisions they make. Now, I don't want to hear in the comments, well, what about the Apple Vision Pro? Look, we've all got our mistakes, but I think largely Apple thinks things through and thinks around corners. And that's one of the things I've actually always appreciated about them. They think about things like user design, user experience. They and not perfectly, but they do a good job of it. And so if anybody's going to go into trying to use technology to improve healthcare, I am excited to know that it's Apple. At the same time, this brings up a question that I was asked on a podcast this week. Somebody said, what are the two areas that you're spending the most time thinking about right now that you think, there's a lot of risk or things that we just aren't thinking about? And I said the two, I'm not going to go into both of them. I won't replay my answer here, but I'll explain the second one. So the first one was understanding people and the messiness of people. We really don't understand people that well. And right now, all this technology is looking to capitalize on people, exploiting them for all this stuff because there's profit in it. The other one is healthcare. And so I'll focus on that because that's where Apple's going. And I see so much potential and opportunity in healthcare and what we can do. And if you've listened to my show for long, I've had guests on who are using AI to help diagnose and cure diseases faster and better and more effectively and more efficiently and less invasively. So there's so much potential with this. And yet The reason I get concerned whenever somebody says we're going to go after healthcare is it's an extremely vulnerable part for people, because we as human beings are extremely afraid of losing our health. We're afraid of death. We're afraid of getting sick. We're afraid of getting old. And anything you're afraid of historically is an area that you're extremely vulnerable and easily manipulated in. And so that's where, for me, I'm encouraged to see Apple going into it, because I do feel like they've, at least to a moderate, pretty strong degree, established themselves as a trustworthy organization. Are they perfect? No, but I have confidence in them. I don't have confidence in a lot of these other companies that are going into healthcare. And I have conversations with some of these companies where, it's like, hey, people will buy this because they're afraid of this or afraid of that, and we think we can do this. And it's like, yeah, but are you actually going to solve that problem for them? Or are you just going to make them feel better about it? And so my caution to people is, one, be excited. I think it's exciting that companies like Apple and many companies I talk to are looking at improving healthcare and health outcomes and making healthcare more affordable. I think that is fantastic, and I will get behind that most of the time. But my warning to people is, first of all, one, you are still going to die. It's still coming for you. You are still going to get sick. You are still going to get old. You will not be able to avoid that fate, regardless of where this is going. And I talked about purpose and hope as something that I have very big concerns about as we move into this digital future. But I'm just telling you right now, if you're excited about healthcare being advanced by technology because you think, if I can just hang in a little longer, then I won't have to worry about this or worry about that, or I can no longer think about that, I would not kick that can down the road and avoid thinking about those things and letting those things influence how you make decisions, because you are setting yourself up for a lot of hurt when it doesn't deliver on these promises. And now you've been banking and putting things off because you thought AI or tech or whatever was going to solve this for you. And now it doesn't. And now all that time is wasted. So be careful of that. And then I would also just say, related to that, be really mindful and careful of a lot of this health tech that's coming out. I'm seeing it left and right. Health apps, health wearables, health, all this stuff. It's promising it'll give you this, it'll do that, it'll help fix this, it'll correct this. And it uses all this really confusing mumbo jumbo language about, their custom proprietary algorithm designed to yada, 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 yada. And it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything. But because we care so deeply and are so afraid of losing our health, we will cling to just about anything that will promise us that it'll fix it for us. And so, one, know that it won't. And two, know that you're vulnerable. Even if you think you're not, even if you're one of those people that's like, I don't care if I die. You say that, but growing up around a funeral home, there were a lot of people who were super confident until it actually became a reality, till they actually got sick, until they actually got that stage 4 diagnosis. Suddenly that confidence faded quickly. So just be careful, because there's lots of people out there that have some very convincing things to sell you if they think they can get you on it. And so be mindful of that as we go into it. All right. That was actually surprised. I got through my entire list. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I hope this was helpful. I'll be back next week, and I've already got some ideas of some of the things I'm anticipating talking about, but we'll see. If you have things that come across your desk or that you're curious about, or you just want to get another perspective, send it my way. Maybe I'll add it to the list, and I'll shout you out if you want. If you're like, no, please don't, then I won't either. But with that, I hope you have a great Friday and a great rest of your week, and we will see you on the other side.